I'm sorry. Before I tell you the very truly absolute end of the story, I've got to interject one more time. For fun, or to help if I can. Why did patricidal beheading have to happen? Why something so awful, so gruesome, so upsetting? Why was their father the dragon? And did they really, really, really have to cut off his head? And what about everything that came before that? All this blood and this pain. What sense does any of it make? Is there any sense at all? I don't know. I mean, what does understanding have to do with returning to your family? Or cutting off your fingers have to do with turning into a wild beast? What does an old crone with a shackle on her leg have to do with faithful Johannes? Or three black ravens with cages full of white doves? Why is the moon creepy and cold while the stars are bright and kind? Why was the widow a good parent and yet not more able to protect Gretel than the bad parent? What does all this mean? These strange, scary, dark, grim tales? I told you already. I don't know. Besides, even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. You see, to find the brightest wisdom, one must pass through the darkest zones. And through the darkest zones, there can be no guide. No guide, that is, but courage. Final chapter. As Hansel and Gretel and the Queen and King held one another, the final golden fumes of the dragon drifted from the chimney and out into the morning air. The gold mingled with the sunrise and slowly suffused itself into the whole kingdom. As people woke that morning, they saw it. They were drawn out of their houses by it, by the beautiful golden smoke that floated beneath the clouds. They followed it. Without wondering, without saying a word, they followed it, as if they knew upon seeing it that something had happened, something important, that, to find out what it was, all they had to do was follow the golden smoke. Along the roads, the subjects of Grimm walked silently towards the source of the beautiful golden light, towards the castle. You never told us, the Queen said to the children as they sat on the floor of the bedroom, blood winding through the crevices of the stones, collecting in little pools. You never told us where you've been and what you've done. Hansel and Gretel looked at each other. You don't have to tell us, the father said gently. Not now, not ever, if you don't want to. Hansel held his sister in his gaze. Her eyes, ocean blue, sunbright, were happier and clearer than he'd seen them in a long, long time. Gretel returned her brother's stare. He looked unburdened, lighter. He looked older than he had ever looked before. Not old with care, but old with wisdom. We can tell you now, Gretel said. And so they did. Hansel started with what Johannes had told him about the old king lying on his deathbed. Gretel planned to pick up as soon as he and Gretel entered the story. But just then there was a knock on the king and queen's chamber door. Yes, said the king. A servant poked his head in. Excuse me, your majesty, he said. They saw blood on the king. Your majesty, are you all right? I'm fine, said the king. What is it? The servant's name was Wilhelm. He shook his head and tried not to stare at the blood. Your people, he went on. They're standing outside the castle. What people? The subjects. What subjects? The queen demanded. All of them, your majesties. The king and queen leapt to their feet. But why? The queen asked. I'm not sure, said the servant. I think it had to do with the golden smoke. What smoke? Said the queen. The dragon, Gretel whispered to her. What? The king said. Hansel gave him a meaningful look. Oh, yes, right. He turned to his wife. Should we go down? He looked concerned. The queen looked at her children. It's okay, Hansel and Gretel nodded, but the queen said, No, let them wait. But your majesty, the servant said, they're calling for you. Let them call, the queen replied. The king added, Try to keep them entertained. The servant was about to protest again, but on seeing the expression on the master's face, thought better of it. He closed the door, and Hansel and Gretel smiled at their parents, and Hansel started again. In the hallway, the other servants crowded around Wilhelm. What are we supposed to do? One asked. Keep them entertained, Wilhelm said, somehow. What are they saying in there? Another asked. I think I hear the children talking. So the servants leaned their heads against the door, and Hansel was telling of the portrait of the Golden Princess. Quick, Wilhelm said. Get everyone you can, every servant in the castle. So one of them did, as the others continued to listen at the door. When all the servants were assembled, Wilhelm said, Jacob, you and I, he gestured to the servant at his right, are going to listen at the door and relay everything we hear. Then you pass it down as best you can to the next servant and keep passing it all the way out to the balcony. The royal crier will stand on the balcony and relay it to all the subjects. He turned to the kitchen staff. Go and make food for everybody. For everybody, the chief cook exclaimed. Everybody. And so the plan was carried out. Hansel and Gretel told the whole tale from the king's deathbed all the way through to the beheading of their father, and the servants relayed it as best they could down the halls of the castle and out the royal crier, who in turn relayed it to the people of the kingdom of Grimm. The storytelling took all through the day and into the early evening, and then all the stars were beginning to twinkle, but before the creepy moon had made an appearance in the southern sky, Hansel and Gretel finished. The family hugged one another more and very tightly and stood up. They stretched their arms and legs, and they went out to the door. The servants had retreated to the opposite wall of the corridor, and when the king came out, he asked what they were all doing, and Wilhelm said they were ready to take them down to the great balcony, where the subjects were still waiting. They'd been fed. You fed them, the queen said. That was very clever of you. And Wilhelm bowed. What did you tell him? The king asked. Wilhelm rubbed his hand nervously over his hair. He looked at this Jacob and the other servants. They all looked at the floor. He said, We told them what Hansel and Gretel told you about their adventures. The queen raised her eyebrows. And let me be the first to congratulate the children, he added quickly, on the successful vanquishing of the dragon. We are all most grateful, more grateful than words can even express. And he said it like he meant it. The queen looked at the king, but the king only smiled. Fine, he said. Well done, that's fine. He too said it like he meant it. Then the royal family followed the line of servants down to the balcony. The subject of the kingdom of Grimm was spread out before the balcony in the thousands, sitting on the ground, eating their suppers that the kitchen had provided, and listening to the end of the story with rapt attention. I understand, the crier was saying as the king and queen and Hansel and Gretel emerged from behind them. I understand, my children. A roar erupted from the subjects. The crier, thinking they were roaring for his telling of the story, took a little bow. But then he saw the royal family, and quickly he retreated. The subjects' cheers were deafening. Hansel and Gretel stood before them and took them all in, and they smiled. Then the king raised his hands, and the subjects quickly grew quiet. I have something I must say, he announced. These two children have killed the dragon when everyone else had tried and everyone else had failed. The subjects cheered wildly, and the king raised his hands again for silence. The dragon would have destroyed this little kingdom altogether, but had left it an empty ruin. He paused. He tried to swallow down a thickness that had developed in his throat. I would have left it an empty ruin. I didn't know what I was doing, of course. I did not know I was the dragon, but the dragon, I would have destroyed the kingdom if Hansel and Gretel had not stopped me. The people of Grimm stared. I can no longer be king. How can I, after what I have done? In all the kingdom of Grimm, not a single person made a single sound. I am passing my crown on, and I ask my wife to do the same. We will pass our crowns to our children. A murmur swept through the crowd. To Hansel and Gretel? To children? Yes, the king declared. They are our children, but they are the wisest, bravest children I have ever known. My wife and I will help them along as they need us, but there's a wisdom in children, a kind of knowing, a kind of believing that we, as adults, do not have. There's a time when a kingdom needs its children. These children. King Hansel and Queen Gretel. Total silence. They will, of course, marry other people, the queen added. Still total silence. And then in the crowd, the tall man from Washington, the bald one with the boxer's nose, shouted out, But they're just little. But before he could finish, someone else called out. It was a young man with long hair and a fresh, raw scar on his face, the one from the tavern. He climbed up on the shoulders of his friend, and Hansel and Gretel saw him. His face was shining. They saved us from the dragon, he cried. Long live King Hansel! Long live Queen Gretel! The people of Grimm gazed up at Hansel and Gretel. There was something in what the king had said about children, about these children. Long live King Hansel! The young man shouted again, and then someone else took up the cheer. Long live Queen Gretel! Another cried it, and another, more and more and more, rising up in tumult all around Hansel and Gretel. Long live King Hansel! Long live Queen Gretel! As they looked up over the town, the people of Grimm, their father leaned down to them and said, These subjects are yours, children, now. And the mother said, You must take care of them. Better, the father added, than we took care of you. Hansel turned to him, and, smiling, gesturing at the crowd, he said, It looks like you did all right. And Gretel reached out and took her father's hand, and then her mother's. The subjects continued to cheer till their throats strained and the sky seemed to whirl. Long live King Hansel, they cried. Long live Queen Gretel. Long live Hansel and Gretel. And you know what? They did. The end. Okay, go take your AR test. Just making sure. The Tale Dark and Grimm. Notice that Grimm has 2 M's because it's after the Grimm brothers. And it's by Adam Gitwitz. Okay, bye.